to serve as a stimulus to compensate for weak private demand. The budget had included aggressive public sector investment program covering roads, government buildings, and so on. Through the first 5 months of the fiscal year, government revenue is up, in part because of higher oil prices, but expenditure is lagging well behind budget estimates for administrative reasons. Many of the projects that were identified in the budget have not got off the ground. It is expected, though, that the pace of government spending would pick up later in the year, though it is doubtful whether the expected fiscal response will be realized. On monetary policy, the bank has continued its accommodating monetary stance by lowering the repo rate from 8.75% to 5% currently. In line with this decline, lending rates have also fallen. Mortgage rates are now around 6.5%, which is the lowest in several years. Unfortunately, credit demand has not responded to the decline in interest rates, as credit by the banking system continues to fall. The reasons advanced include some tightening of loan conditions, but there also seem to be confidence issues, both with respect to individuals taking on new indebtedness and business confidence. In 2010, there are some signs of continuing recovery, though these are still tentative. The data for the first 2 months of 2010 indicate that cement sales are up, new car registrations are up, but according to the business sector, the severe drought and the problems at the port and other long-standing challenges are affecting productivity and the sector's willingness to take on large expenditure commitments. Credit has continued to fall in the first 2 months of 2010. What are the short-term prospects? On GDP, we had initially projected 2% growth for 2010, predicated on the government fiscal stimulus and the private sector kicking in over time. So far, the stimulus has been less than envisaged, as I indicated, and there are continuing uncertainties in the private sector. There's a what's more, the announcement of the elections has, as in all countries and for all elections, has sort of precipitated, has triggered a wait-and-see attitude where investors put off decisions and businessmen put off their spending plans. Given this, whether the 2% could be realized is a serious issue. There are downside risks to the 2% projection. We have not produced any revised projections. We normally do that at the middle of the year. But I wouldn't be surprised if when it's done, we would need to reduce the 2% somewhat. On inflation, given the drought and its likely impact on food prices, and also given rising commodity prices, there could be upward pressure on inflation once again. The point is, and this upward pressure would clearly create challenges for the management of monetary policy. Interest rates are now very low. The point is that with excess liquidity, low loan demand, slow growth, and higher than acceptable unemployment, these are not the ideal conditions for raising interest rates. Thus, the bank will seek to maintain interest rates as long as possible, but would have to review its monetary policy stance subject to what happens to food prices and headline inflation. Beyond 2010, of course, the major policy challenge would be to re-establish fiscal balance after 2 years of fiscal deficits averaging 5%. This would be critical in order to contain the increase in government indebtedness, which is now somewhere around 35% of GDP. In addition to reducing this, well, it would be easier and there would be greater support for reducing the fiscal deficit if there is a resurgence of private confidence and private sector growth in the economy. It is clear that in order to ensure this, there needs to be agreement on a new platform for economic diversification and increased productivity. Much of this is contained in the documents you have. You can read them at your leisure, but I would be available to answer any questions, my colleagues and I. Thank you very much.
I'm sure I don't have to give instructions for this part. Come forward to the microphone, just say your name and ask your question.
Good afternoon, Governor. It seems as though you are distancing yourself from the original 2% projection that you made in January this year. Could you elaborate on what are some of the issues that have caused you to do that?
I distancing myself is your word, but I mean, am I going to put my meager salary on it? I'm not sure. The 2% projection was based on a heavy level of fiscal impulse, on the assumption that the private sector would only gradually regain its confidence and start spending again. Okay? In fact, I think when we met last, we expected private sector credit and private sector spending to kick in somewhere between the second and the third quarter. What has happened? To start with, the fiscal impulse has not been as strong as we expected, notwithstanding the budget projections, because apparently many of the large projects